What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about 1480 Radio Pirates. So 1480 Radio Pirates is actually a film that already recently came out, and actually in some places I think may have come out way earlier than this year. It's a film that, based on its release dates that you see online and when it first actually started being shown at different festivals and stuff like that, it seems like it's had a very scattered release across the whole world, and I think that's part of why I'm talking to you guys about this movie today. I was reached out to by April from Gravita's Ventures, who's given me the opportunity to watch and review some movies recently through some screeners that I got to see a little bit early. And so I actually got sent a screener for this movie to review it. I was asked if I could review this movie, and my assumption, I didn't ask, but my assumption is because this movie has had such a scattered release in various places, they probably want to get a little bit more word of mouth, a little bit more discussion around this film that may have fallen under the radar or flown under the radar simply because of its release schedule, its release style, and the lack of marketing. Quite frankly, I've never heard of this film before, but I was definitely interested once I read the title and actually read through the synopsis. And so the basic gist of this film is it kind of centers on a group of young men who decide to kind of want to bring rock and roll to the world. This is obviously back in the day when rock and roll was still taboo. I believe this film takes place in 1965. I could be incorrect, but it is within the mid to late 60s. And yeah, rock and roll is still kind of taboo. It's not as popular as it would obviously go on to be in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And yeah, so pretty much they're trying to get rock and roll on the radio, and it's just not happening. The government is not allowing it, and these guys end up finding a boat and finding kind of a specific area in the water of the oceans where they can actually put this boat, actually anchor it right there, and actually will be able to broadcast to different parts of New Zealand, which is where this film takes place, and yeah, get the rock and roll out to the radio without having to actually deal with the government. As you can imagine, that does kind of cause some problems throughout the course of their story, and yeah, this is actually based on a true story. I don't know anything about that true story, but I was definitely interested in it more after watching this. However, this is just going to be my initial thoughts on the movie in and of itself and the facts that it presented. I don't know the actual story, and I didn't do research on the actual story after watching this, so this won't be a comparison or anything like that. Just solely my thoughts on the movie in and of itself. This film is directed by Craig Newland, who I'm not familiar with, but just looking on his IMDb, it turns out that he actually did, I believe, a short film back in 2009 simply titled Radio Pirates, which I believe is based on this exact same premise, but he was able to do it in a smaller scale then, and then this was his chance to be able to take that same story that he's clearly passionate about and do an actual feature film based on that premise. So yeah, overall, I'm a huge fan of rock and roll. I've talked about it here on the channel. Metal is my favorite genre, but just the whole rock and roll genre overall is without a doubt my favorite genre as a whole, just umbrella of genres and the various kinds of things you can do with rock and roll. So I love the idea of being able to see a story where rock and roll is brought to the public in a real sense. Ultimately, I didn't know how I felt about this movie by the time it was over. I was rather conflicted, and I saw it this morning, and I went through a whole work day, and I wanted to kind of let it sit with me. And ultimately, here are the biggest positives I can give this movie. It's a very well-acted film that's well shot. And again, a big thanks to April from Gravita's Ventures for letting me check this movie out, and just being able to kind of, form an opinion and be able to talk about it here on the channel. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to check out a movie, whether it's early or have a movie sent to me and say, hey, are you, willing to review this? The fact that anybody cares about my thoughts on this movie is awesome in and of itself. And so, yeah, I commend them for making this movie. I commend Craig Newland for chasing this goal to make this movie. Ultimately, I wasn't captivated by the story. Now, I looked at some other reviews just to see what other people were saying, and there were people specifically from New Zealand saying that this is a New Zealand gem, or just saying that it's a great film for people who are from New Zealand. So on that level, I feel like I can't detract from that, right? If you're from New Zealand and this film kind of sings to you or speaks to your soul, I can't take that away from you. Ultimately, the film for me just was a little bit lackluster. It's incredibly well acted, and that's probably my biggest praise I'll give this movie, as well as some great cinematography. And there's a lot about the set design, the overall kind of putting it in that period kind of element of the film, the fact that the film does feel like it takes place in the 60s. All of that was really, really well done. And that's definitely not easy to do in 2021 or whenever they filmed this, even if it was in the range of 2010 to now. Yeah, whenever they ended up actually filming this movie, it's never never easy to do a period piece and have to kind of change the area and the clothing that people were wearing and the cars and all that jazz. So I praise the filmmakers on that level alone. I think there's definitely a lot shown when it comes to the creativity and the talent behind the camera that's definitely shown when you watch this movie on that level alone. Beyond that, the film does something that I'm not really crazy about that biopics do, and it's kind of a little bit jumpy in its story. There are times where our characters are just now meeting up, they're just getting together, they're just kind of setting up the plans to be these radio pirates, and then literally the next scene is people from the government pretty much knowing that these characters are doing it. And then the next scene, our radio pirate characters now have fans. And then the next scene, again, the government will know something else. And then the next scene, it's our, people kind of deciding that they want to do something else. And it just felt like we were bouncing from a bunch of different locations where there wasn't really the kind of fleshing out of these moments that I feel a movie really needs. If you're being introduced to a story like this for the very first time through a biopic, it's never going to work 100% for you if you don't really have the little bits and pieces that kind of flesh out that story over time. You can have time jumps and time skips that definitely get to the more important stuff, but ultimately while watching it, I just feel like the way that it kind of jumped around and the way it jumped around to all these different characters and people in the government and people who were part of this group that I don't really feel like were fleshed out too well, I honestly just didn't really care about their journey, the characters, and even though, there is that inspiring, they did it kind of feel at the very end, which is obviously what the movie is all about. I think ultimately, I just feel like by the time the movie was over, I just couldn't help but look at the screen and think, was it really all that worth it? Everything that these characters go through, especially our main character in the film, Richard, and the kind of the issues that he kind of brings up in his own wedding, and financial issues, and some other serious things that end up happening in this film, some tragedies. I think ultimately I sat back and thought to myself, with just the way that the film portrayed the story, was it really worth it? And quite frankly, for me, I don't really think it was. I don't think the film, for me, portrayed it to be worth it in the end. I don't really feel like the ends justified the means in this situation, whereas in a lot of other situations where it's kind of like somebody fighting for this one thing, this right, this freedom, ultimately a lot of times if the story is built up, well, you feel their struggle, you feel alongside them, you are rooting for them. And ultimately it wasn't like I wasn't rooting for these characters, but I wasn't crazy about them. I didn't care about their journey, even though it's based on a true story, and the true story is more inspiring in thought for me than it was the actual movie. I also just want to mention Matt Whelan, who played Richard, the main character. I thought he did a really good job. I thought that ultimately, I think had the story just been told in a different way for me, maybe I would have attached to it a little bit more, but I do think the performances in this film were really strong. So Matt Whelan, Daniel Musgrove, David Aston, just a couple of names in this film. I think the cast was really strong in this film. I just do think that there were a lot of characters, especially when it comes to our group of radio pirates, that ultimately don't get a lot of screen time, and by the time the movie's over, it's just like, that's the dopey guy, that's the funny guy, and that's the fat guy. That's kind of how I felt about the group of characters, and that's ultimately just because I feel like that's all the film really gave me in terms of their characters. So as far as this movie goes, do I recommend it? I think it's going to depend on you. I think if it's a movie that sounds interesting to you, as usual, you guys can find the link to the trailer for this movie in my description box. I'm sure you've seen some of the trailer images that have appeared here on screen throughout. And ultimately, I just feel like this movie could have been a lot stronger. It could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot cooler, but it just really wasn't. It kind of just left me feeling like, that's a movie. It was over. I can't see myself rewatching it, but it is already available on VOD. Sorry if you guys just heard that. I just bumped my mic. But anyway, a big thanks to you guys for watching. Please do hit that like button if you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys have not already done so. And if you've already seen 1480 Radio Pirates, please let me know down below in the comment section. Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Definitely curious to hear what you guys have to say about this movie. And yeah, I'll go ahead and wrap this up now. Thank you guys for watching. Didn't mean to ramble on about this for so long, but here we are. Bye-bye.